All right, guys, welcome back. In the last part, we looked at the authentication and we learned about the access token and the refresh token, and we saw how that worked. Now, in this part, we'll be looking at permissions and testing. We'll set custom permissions and we'll see how to run tests on our work. So testing is actually good. It's a good practice. When you're done with your project, you can always try to just run some tests. Sometimes you can do the test before you start the project or alongside the project, but it's good practice to do. So to create the permissions, and while we're doing these permissions, by the way, it is to enforce object level access, so that only the right users, can have access to certain tasks. We have that in a way, but we just want to make sure it is well enforced. Then also, so that you can learn how to implement customized permissions, right? Rather than just the using the is allowed or is authenticated permissions that comes from the REST framework, right? At times whereby you might want to have your own customized permissions depending on what you're trying to achieve. So we'll come to our project app and we'll create a new file. We'll create a new model. I'll just come here, then I'll create a new model. I'll call this permissions.py. Permissions.py. So in this permissions.py, this is where we would create our custom permissions. So let me just paste this here. Then we'll do the one for the task. Um, okay, so if you look at this, we have two classes. From REST framework, we imported permissions, right? Which is what we're using to create our own custom permission. We have our class is owner, and you can see it basically just allows only owners of an object to access it, right? So you have to be the exact owner of an object, in this case, a task or a project that is an object, to have access to it. So if not, then it won't give you access to it. Then as project owner, this is just telling us, oh, you have to be the owner of a project, to have access to it. So while we did that in the views logic, that is using the is authenticated. Was it again? Let me see. And this query sets, right? This is just a way to also do that. We can also have customized permissions depending on what you're trying to achieve. So I'll just come here and I'll import that permissions. So I'll say, well, this permissions import. Let me just check that real quick. Is owner, then is project owner. Is owner is project owner. So I'll just come here function classes. For this one here, I can say okay, not in this place. I'll put it in the project detail. Yes, this place. So here we can say is project owner. Then for the tax detail, you can come here and also add this here and say is owner. Yeah, that's just it. It's as simple as that. So you can create custom permissions depending on what you're trying to achieve, and you can also place them in the permissions in your view, right? So depending on what you're trying to achieve, That's about that. So having done this now, the next thing we'll do is you can test this. You can test this, on your Postman. If you try to access a particular route and that is not that does not belong to the logged in user, and you see what you have, right? I hope you've been able to create more users and more projects and more tasks as well, right? So this get query sets, just like we said, this prevents, these tasks from being accessible to other logged in users. Only the owner of that tax, should be able to see it, right? However, the permissions, this one that we just added, is owner, ensures that no one can. I mean, if you now have access to it, you can't modify it basically, right? If you're not an owner of it, you can't modify it basically. So we'll be going to the testing now. We'll see how to test. Write a test script for one feature. Ideally, you want to test all the features, right? In a robust in production grade app, you want to test all the features or the main features, right? Sometimes people don't write tests, right? We have a lot of developers that don't write tests, especially if they've done the work over and again and it's working fine. But then again, it's just a good practice because never can tell what can break, right? So we'll come to this test.py, test, and this is where we're going to do it. So don't forget we are using the JWT. So our test will also involve this. Just going to just paste this here. So we are importing the user model from the models on the django.config.auth. Now from REST framework.test, we're importing API test case. We're also importing status. We're importing the tokens from the simple JWT. We're importing refresh token. Then we're importing the project model. So we're just working on this project model alone. We're not doing the tax. You can also do the same thing for the tax to test it, right? Now, we have a class here, and you can see it's inheriting from the API test case that I've imported here. We have a method. Excuse me, please. We have a method, and here we are creating a user. So this is just a demo user or a test user. It's not a new user. So everything happens here is just test, right? They're just demo. They're not real. So we created a username, test user, password is password. So this would create this user, store it in this user object. Then we generate a token for that user, right? We also generate an access token and a refresh token, as you can see here. Then we set the authorization header, just like we're doing in Postman, right? Bearer, and we pass the access token to the bearer value so that we can have access to what we want to do. Now, having done that, we can now write a method to create a project, right? So if it works fine here, that's good. It shows everything's working fine, which we know because we've already done the project creation already. So we know that the what's it called? The project will work or the test case will work because we've done it before, right? So let's look at this now. Just give me a minute. Let me save this here. So you can see we're just creating, you can see the data, the name is this, and the description is test description. Then also, you can see the response is like we're sending a response, right? It is a post request, basically. API project, excuse me, then data. And eventually we assert to see if it's a 201 status code. And having done that, it would just count if it's successful and returns one. So if successful, we have this 200 status, 201 status code. Otherwise, it failed. So I'm going to stop the server. Then to run this test is very simple. We just come here and say Python manage.py. test, excuse me, Python manager.py test. You can see found one test, which is this just this one test, and you can see here, it created a test database. I mean, it's not using the SQLite database; it's just a mock database, and it checked every other thing, and eventually, you can see we have an OK. It destroys the test database, and this OK basically means it works successfully. So you can run the test. You can write a test for the what's the word now? Task creation or to delete or to update particular resource, right? Maybe delete a particular project. You can write a test for that as well. But ensure that you follow this process, that your access token is created as well, just as we did here. Then you pass it to the authorization using the bearer using the authorization, and you can now write a test. So this is the main test here. All of these above are just the setup as it is. Right. So with this, we've come to the end of this particular project and workflow. In the next part, we'll look at how to create documentation, right, using the Swagger framework. So, because if other people want to use your APIs, right, maybe a front-end developer or even a back-end developer, they don't need to start coming to check your code base and everything, right? Especially if front-end developer, they just come to the documentation of your API and they can understand what the endpoints are doing, each endpoint are doing. So we look at that, how to create documentations. Then after that, we'll try to deploy this API to the internet. That's the production server. Because as it is, it's currently on our local server. It's only accessible in this place. So try and see if you can create your permissions, customize permissions, and test it on Postman. And also, when you're done, then you can also write your test. And I would encourage you to also create more tests other than just this this create project. You can create a project, a test for create stacks to delete projects or update a project or the likes. Thank you very much.